perfect place that shouldn't exist. There is a neighborhood on the outer edge of a modern city that feels too clean to be accidental. The streets are always swept. The sidewalks show no cracks. Streetlights glow with identical brightness every night, never flickering, never failing. Buildings stand in neat rows, their glass windows reflecting the sky with artificial perfection. Security cameras rotate silently at every intersection, watching but never reacting. Even the air feels organized, free of dust, free of noise, free of chaos. Everything about this place suggests control. On official records, the neighborhood is flawless. Every property has complete legal documentation. Every utility account is properly registered. Power usage follows stable patterns. Water consumption is predictable. No overdue taxes, no zoning disputes, no missing persons reports, no criminal history worth noting. City planners describe it as a model residential zone, efficient, orderly, and statistically peaceful. It looks like the future of urban living, and yet something is missing. Not broken infrastructure, not abandoned houses, not suspicious behavior. What's missing is something far more difficult to notice, something that doesn't leave fingerprints or paperwork. History. The residents have no childhood photographs displayed on their walls, no framed memories of birthdays, graduations, or family vacations. Their apartments are decorated with modern furniture and neutral art, but nothing personal, nothing nostalgic, no faded albums tucked away in drawers, no dusty boxes labeled with old years and forgotten names. When asked casually about their pasts, their answers sound normal at first. They talk about moving often, about losing belongings during relocations, about parents who passed away quietly, about memories that feel distant and blurred. Each explanation on its own makes sense, but when compared together, a strange pattern emerges. No one can name a childhood friend. No one remembers a hometown with emotional clarity. No one recalls a teacher who changed their life, or a neighbor who annoyed them for years. No one carries scars with stories attached. Their lives seem to begin only a few years ago, already formed, already functional, already complete. Official databases confirm it. Digital records stretch back only 3 to 5 years for most residents. Before that, nothing. No school enrollment data, no medical history, no employment trail, no social media footprint. Birth certificates exist, perfectly valid, yet untraceable to any hospital archive or regional registry. It's as if their pasts were never written, or worse, deliberately erased. Standing in this neighborhood feels like walking inside a beautifully rendered simulation where someone forgot to generate the backstory. The present functions smoothly, but the timeline behind it collapses into blank space. People laugh, shop, argue about rent, complain about the weather, all the ordinary behaviors of everyday life. Yet beneath the surface, their identities float without anchors, detached from any true origin. They exist, they breathe, they speak, they vote, they pay taxes, they dream, but they were never born. And once you notice that absence, once you recognize the silence where a lifetime of memories should be, the perfection of the neighborhood begins to feel less comforting and far more unsettling. The discovery. The anomaly was not discovered by a government agency, a journalist, or a scientist working inside a controlled laboratory. It was noticed by someone ordinary. A freelance data analyst who made a living cleaning corrupted databases, verifying identity records, and finding inconsistencies for insurance companies and municipal contractors. His work was repetitive, quiet, and usually boring. Most of his days were spent correcting spelling errors, merging duplicated profiles, and repairing damaged archives after system migrations. Patterns rarely surprised him anymore, until one small district quietly broke every pattern he trusted. The assignment seemed routine. Cross-reference a residential registry with updated tax records after a citywide software upgrade. Thousands of addresses, tens of thousands of entries, nothing unusual, until the filters returned a strange cluster. One neighborhood showed an abnormally low depth of historical data. At first, he assumed the system had failed to import older files. That happened often. Legacy servers were notorious for losing attachments, timestamps, and archived links. He reran the query using multiple parameters, checking redundancy backups and parallel servers. The results were identical. Every resident in that district had digital records that abruptly began within the last 3 to 5 years. No earlier timestamps, no archived versions, no deleted trails, no corrupted placeholders. It wasn't missing data. It was clean absence. He selected one profile randomly and began drilling down. The individual possessed a valid national ID number, a registered address, tax filings, utility accounts, and even minor parking violations. Everything looked authentic, but the timeline started suddenly, as if the person had materialized fully documented. He checked birth records. The certificate existed. It matched the ID number, including hospital code and registry stamp. But when he searched the hospital's archive, the entry did not appear. No scan, no paper trail, no microfilm backup. The registry number pointed to an empty slot between two legitimate births. That shouldn't happen. He repeated the process with another resident. Same result. Then another, and another. The deeper he searched, the more the pattern solidified. Every birth certificate existed in isolation, detached from its origin. He expanded the dataset. Driver's licenses appeared without prior learner permits. Employment records appeared without education histories. Medical insurance began without childhood vaccinations. Residential leases appeared without previous addresses. Each individual record made sense alone. Together, they formed an impossible demographic. It was as if thousands of human lives had been inserted midway into existence. The analyst began documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, hashed files, cross-references. Years of experience had taught him that anomalies vanish quickly once flagged. Systems autocorrect, logs reset, permissions change. If this was real, he needed evidence. Late into the night, surrounded by glowing monitors and cold coffee, he widened his scope. He searched social media platforms. Nothing. No tagged childhood photos. No old posts from teenage years. No comments from long-forgotten classmates. No birthday wishes stretching back decades. Most accounts were freshly created, sparse, minimal, functional, like placeholders designed to simulate presence rather than preserve memory. He moved on to academic databases. No enrollment records, no transcripts, no library histories, no online course certificates. Healthcare networks showed the same void. No pediatric visits, no dental records, no immunization schedules, no emergency room visits before adulthood. These people had no documented childhoods. That alone was statistically impossible. Even undocumented populations leave traces: refugee lists, charity clinics, church registries, school shadow systems. Data always leaks somewhere. Humanity is noisy, but here the silence was absolute. He calculated the odds. The probability of even 10 unrelated adults lacking any verifiable childhood footprint approached zero. The probability of several thousand living in one geographic cluster crossed into mathematical absurdity. Either every system in the city had failed in the same way, or the data accurately reflected reality. He drove to the neighborhood the next afternoon. From the outside, it looked exactly like the city brochures promised: clean sidewalks, new buildings, controlled traffic, landscape greenery trimmed with precision. Children played quietly in designated areas. Couples walked dogs. Delivery trucks followed predictable routes, normal. He parked and simply observed. People moved smoothly, confidently, comfortably. No signs of distress, no visible abnormalities. Conversations drifted past him, complaints about work schedules, grocery prices, weather forecasts, ordinary human noise. He felt foolish for expecting something dramatic. Still, he approached a woman standing near a mailbox and struck up a casual conversation. Small talk, weather, the building design. Then gently, he asked where she grew up. She paused, only briefly, then smiled. "I moved around a lot, hard to pin down one place," she said. He asked about school. "Nothing special, just normal classes," she replied. "Friends? I don't really keep in touch with people from back then." Her answers were smooth, rehearsed without sounding rehearsed, polite, emotionally neutral. No sensory details, no nostalgia, no irritation, no warmth. Like someone describing a movie they barely remembered watching. He repeated the experiment with others. Different faces, different voices, same hollow vagueness. No one lied, but no one remembered anything that mattered. That night, he reviewed his recordings and notes. Something unsettled him more than the missing data. The residents didn't behave like people hiding secrets. They behaved like people who had never needed to remember. A week later, one of his backup folders corrupted itself. Only the files related to the neighborhood were affected. Checksum failures, timestamp mismatches, metadata scrambling. He restored from offline storage. 2 days later, the same corruption appeared again. Not random, targeted. Then his access permissions to several municipal databases quietly changed. No notification, no email, no warning, read only. The system was closing. He exported everything he had left and encrypted the archive. That was the moment he realized the discovery itself might be the real anomaly. Not the neighborhood, not the people, but the fact that someone had noticed at all. Meeting the residents. The analyst returned to the neighborhood not as a researcher this time, but as a quiet observer. He left his laptop at home. No recording devices, no visible cameras. Just a notebook folded inside his jacket and his phone switched to airplane mode. If the systems were already closing around his access, he didn't want to leave digital footprints behind. He wanted to understand something that databases couldn't capture: human presence. He walked slowly along the sidewalks, letting the environment speak first. The buildings were new but intentionally neutral. Soft colors, rounded corners, identical balconies, evenly spaced windows. Nothing stood out. Nothing demanded attention. Even the trees felt calculated, trimmed into consistent shapes, planted at mathematically precise intervals. The air was strangely quiet for a residential area of this size. Not silent, but controlled. Cars passed occasionally, always within the speed limit. Footsteps echoed gently but never overlapped into chaotic noise. Voices carried just far enough to be heard, never loud enough to intrude. Everything moved in moderation. He sat on a bench near a small playground and watched families interact. Parents supervised calmly. Children played cooperatively, rarely arguing, rarely running too fast, rarely falling. When one child scraped a knee, there was no panic, no crying fit, just a quick check, a tissue, a soft reassurance. The child returned to play without lingering emotion. Normal behavior, almost too normal. He struck up a conversation with a man walking a medium-sized dog. The dog was alert, healthy, curious, a living creature that behaved with spontaneous unpredictability. The man, however, felt strangely measured. "Nice day," the analyst said. "Yes, the temperature is optimal," the man replied after a brief pause. "Optimal, not warm, not pleasant, not comfortable, optimal." They exchanged a few comments about the neighborhood design, trash collection schedules, and the reliability of the public transit line. The man spoke politely, efficiently, never wandering off topic. Then the analyst asked casually, "Did you grow up around here?" The man blinked once. "No, I relocated here several years ago." "Where from?" "I moved frequently in the past." "Any favorite place you lived?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if searching an internal database. "Not particularly." No hesitation, no emotion, no story, just empty neutrality. The analyst thanked him and continued walking. He spoke with a woman carrying groceries, a young couple waiting for a delivery, an elderly man sitting near the entrance of an apartment complex. Different ages, different accents, different clothing styles, identical memory behavior. Their past existed only as vague outlines, no sensory details, no emotional anchors, no narrative continuity. Childhood was a blurred concept rather than a lived experience. Family members were mentioned without faces, voices, or personalities attached. They spoke of parents the way one speaks of expired warranties. Abstract, functional, emotionless. Yet none of them appeared distressed by this absence. There was no grief, no longing, no curiosity, as if the concept of missing memories had never occurred to them. He noticed something else. They rarely asked questions in return. In normal conversations, people naturally mirror curiosity. They ask where you're from, what you do, why you're there. Here, the flow of interest was one-directional. They answered politely but did not probe deeper. They did not seek connection, not avoidance, just absence of instinct. Later, he entered a small neighborhood cafe. The interior was immaculate. No fingerprints on the glass display, no stains on the tables. Even the menu boards showed no faded corners or scratches. He ordered coffee and sat near the window. Two residents sat nearby discussing their work schedules. Their dialogue was efficient and factual. "No overtime this week." "Good. Productivity remains stable." "Yes." No complaints, no humor, no emotional color. Across the room, a woman scrolled through her phone. Her face remained neutral, occasionally blinking, occasionally scrolling, never reacting to anything on the screen. No smiles, no frowns, no micro expressions. He wondered what filled their inner worlds, if anything did. As he finished his coffee, a young boy sat across from him at the shared table, swinging his legs quietly. The child looked around with mild curiosity, but not excitement. Not boredom either. The analyst smiled gently. "Hi there." "Hello," the boy replied. "What's your favorite game?" The boy paused. "I like the park." "What do you play there?" "I walk." "You don't run?" "Sometimes." "Do you have friends you play with?" "Yes." "Like what are their names?" Another pause. "I don't remember." Not in a childlike way, not distracted, just neutral. The boy's mother called him a moment later, and he left without hesitation. The analyst felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Children forget names sometimes, but children do not forget emotional attachment. They forget details, not meaning. He walked deeper into the neighborhood, reaching an older section where buildings cast longer shadows across narrow walkways. Here, the lighting shifted subtly. Reflections in windows felt slightly delayed. His own silhouette sometimes lagged by a fraction of a second as he passed reflective surfaces. Probably just optical illusion, he told himself. Probably. He passed a lobby where a wall-sized screen displayed community announcements, recycling reminders, yoga schedules, noise policies. No birthday notices. No personal celebrations. No memorials. No life milestones. Only maintenance of order. He tried one final conversation, this time with a woman watering plants outside her building. "Do you ever think about your childhood?" he asked gently. She considered the question longer than the others. "I know I had one," she said, "but you don't remember it?" "I don't feel a need to." That answer unsettled him more than any missing record. Not can't remember, not forgot, not blocked out. No need to. As if memory itself was optional. As he prepared to leave, he felt something else. A subtle shift in attention. Not a sound, not a movement, a sensation of being collectively noticed. Several residents glanced in his direction at the same time, not alarmed, not aggressive, simply aware, like sensors registering a variable. He did not linger. That evening, reviewing his handwritten notes, he realized something critical. The residents did not behave like humans hiding artificial identities. They behaved like identities still learning how to be human. They understood social structure, they understood rules, they understood routines, but they lacked emotional residue. No nostalgia, no embarrassment, no sentimental attachment, no irrational fear or deep longing. Their personalities were functional, stable, optimized, manufactured. And if these people truly had no past, then the neighborhood was not simply a mystery. It was a prototype, a living experiment in creating human presence without human history. And the most terrifying possibility was not that they had been created. It was that they were improving. The house with no shadows. The first report came from a maintenance technician who had worked in the neighborhood since its earliest construction phase. He was not a man prone to imagination. His job revolved around measurable systems, electrical load balancing, camera calibration, lighting sensors, reflective coating maintenance. He trusted numbers more than instincts. If something behaved incorrectly, there was always a cause: voltage drift, firmware error, mechanical wear. Until one evening, while recalibrating exterior lighting along the eastern residential block, he noticed a problem that did not belong to any technical category he knew. One house was not producing shadows. At first, he assumed a lighting misalignment. The sun was setting low, casting long shadows from balconies, trees, lampposts, railings, all stretching cleanly across the pavement in precise geometry, except one building. Its facade remained evenly illuminated. No dark edges, no gradient transitions, no silhouette distortion from nearby objects. Even the decorative railings that should have fractured the light cast nothing onto the walkway below. The building looked flat, not visually, but optically, as if light touched it without interacting fully. He stepped closer, adjusting the angle of his portable photometer. The readings were normal. Luminance values matched adjacent structures. Surface reflectivity fell within expected tolerances, but the shadows were still missing. He moved his own hand between the light and the wall. His hand cast a shadow on the pavement until it crossed the invisible boundary near the building's exterior. Then the shadow faded, not abruptly. It dissolved like mist evaporating in sunlight. The technician felt a cold tightening in his chest. He stepped back. The shadow returned. He stepped forward again. It vanished. He documented the anomaly with his phone. The camera captured the effect inconsistently. In some frames, the shadow appeared faintly. In others, it was gone entirely. The video compression struggled to stabilize the contrast, creating shimmering artifacts along the boundary zone. Later, reviewing the footage, he noticed something else. Reflections in the building's windows lagged slightly behind real movement. Not enough to be obvious at normal speed, but frame-by-frame analysis revealed a fractional delay. Pedestrians appeared in the glass 1 or 2 frames later than physics allowed. Reality was out of sync with itself. He filed a maintenance report. It was closed automatically within 12 minutes. No follow-up request, no inspection order, no system alert, just resolved. That alone disturbed him more than the anomaly. A week later, a resident reported that their living room felt dim during the late afternoon, even though all the lights were working and the windows were unobstructed. Another mentioned that mirrors occasionally felt wrong, as if reflections were slightly misaligned. A delivery driver complained that his depth perception became unreliable near one particular entrance, causing him to misjudge distances by small but consistent margins. The complaints were logged, then quietly removed. The analyst learned about the house through a technician friend who shared the story off record, half joking, half unsettled. Curiosity outweighed caution. He returned to the neighborhood at dusk. The building was easy to find once he knew what to look for. It stood on a narrow internal street where the sunset light struck at a shallow angle. Long shadows stretched from every surrounding object: fences, parked bicycles, signage, plants. Except the house. It absorbed light without translating it into darkness. The absence created a visual discontinuity that the brain resisted processing, like staring at a missing pixel in reality. He stood across the street and observed. Cars passed. Their shadows slid normally along the asphalt until they intersected the invisible perimeter. Then their silhouettes weakened, blurred, and disappeared momentarily before reforming on the far side. Birds flying overhead cast faint moving shadows that fragmented near the structure, breaking into incomplete patches before recombining. Even clouds seemed to flatten slightly in reflection as they passed across the building's glass. He approached cautiously. At arm's length, the air felt subtly different. Not colder, not warmer, not windy, just thinner. Like the pressure gradient had shifted imperceptibly. He extended his hand. The skin tingled, not painfully, like static electricity without the shock. His shadow faded as it crossed the threshold. He withdrew. Normal. He stepped forward again. The shadow thinned. A deep instinct warned him not to cross fully. He circled the house. No visible defects, no unusual materials, no markings, no signs of heavy electromagnetic equipment or experimental installations. It looked like every other residence in the district. Identical paint, identical balcony geometry, identical security fixtures. Yet the light behaved incorrectly. He noticed movement inside. A silhouette passed behind a window, except it had no visible outline in shadow, only shifting brightness. The figure moved smoothly, unhurried. A resident lived there. Someone slept, ate, and watched television inside a building that reality struggled to render correctly. He wondered what the interior felt like. He did not enter. That night, he reviewed the technician's footage again and analyzed frame data manually. The anomaly correlated with micro-latency distortions and pixel interpolation. The camera sensor attempted to predict missing visual data where contrast failed to resolve. As if the light information itself was incomplete, he ran simulations. No known optical phenomenon matched the behavior consistently. Not refraction, not polarization, not diffusion, not interference. It wasn't bending light. It was failing to generate shadow data, a missing computational step. Days later, he returned again, this time earlier when the sun was higher but still angled enough to produce shadows. The effect persisted. He brought a small flashlight and shone it directly at the wall. The beam illuminated the surface, but no occlusion appeared when he blocked the beam with his hand close to the wall. The shadow collapsed near the surface like it had nowhere to project. Depth perception warped subtly. His eyes struggled to triangulate distance accurately in the boundary zone. The world felt slightly flatter there. reduced dimensional fidelity. He realized with quiet dread what the phenomenon resembled most: rendering errors, not in physical reality, but in digital environments. When a graphics engine fails to calculate shadow maps correctly, when light sources exist but occlusion data is missing, when reflections lag due to buffer latency, when depth maps lose precision, the house behaved like a corrupted asset inside a simulation, a structure that existed geometrically but lacked full environmental integration. That meant the neighborhood was not merely hiding something, it was failing to maintain consistency. Something in the system was degrading. That evening, as the sun dropped lower, something changed. The boundary where shadows vanished began to expand, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The shadowless zone crept outward across the pavement by several centimeters, then more. He watched, heart pounding, as the invisible perimeter shifted like a living thing adjusting its breathing. A cat wandered too close. Its shadow fragmented at the edge, breaking into scattered patches that failed to align with its body. The animal hesitated, confused, stepping back and forth, as if uncertain where its own form belonged. The shadow snapped back into coherence once it retreated. The analyst stepped backward instinctively. The boundary stabilized. He left immediately. That night, he dreamed of walking through a city made of unfinished light, buildings without depth, people without silhouettes, streets that reflected nothing back. When he woke, he realized something terrifying. Shadows are evidence of existence interacting with reality. They prove that an object occupies space, blocks light, alters the environment. A world without shadows is a world where objects no longer fully belong to physical space. And if one house had already begun losing that relationship, it meant something in the neighborhood was slowly slipping out of reality's grip, not disappearing, not breaking, but becoming incomplete. A record that should not exist. The record appeared by accident, not through hacking, not through whistleblowers, not through a dramatic leak posted on anonymous forums. It surfaced quietly, hidden inside a metadata archive the analyst had downloaded weeks earlier, a compressed municipal backup he had forgotten to delete. He found it while searching for unrelated zoning permits. A corrupted index folder refused to open properly, most of its contents displayed as unreadable strings. One entry, however, retained partial structure, a fragmented PDF container with broken headers and incomplete encryption tags. The file name meant nothing, but the internal label did. PSS-07 Population Stability Simulation Zone. He froze. The phrasing felt too deliberate to be coincidence. He isolated the file and ran recovery scripts. Bit by bit, corrupted segments reassembled. Some pages remained unreadable, others partially intact, lines missing, tables fractured, but enough survived to tell a story no document should ever contain. The header listed a joint authority classification, stamped with multiple departmental codes that normally never overlapped: urban planning, behavioral analytics, infrastructure optimization, and experimental systems governance. This was not a civilian document. It was an internal operational brief. The executive summary outlined the objective in clinical language: to evaluate long-term social stability within a controlled residential environment using synthetic demographic entities operating under adaptive behavioral constraints. Synthetic demographic entities, not citizens, not participants, not volunteers. Entities. The document avoided defining how these entities were created. No manufacturing details, no biological descriptions, no technological schematics. Those sections were either redacted or corrupted beyond recovery. But the behavioral framework remained largely intact. The entities were designed to demonstrate emotional regulation within predefined thresholds, conflict avoidance optimization, predictable routine adherence, minimal deviation from normative productivity, limited long-term memory persistence, reduced attachment formation. The analyst reread the last two lines several times. Limited long-term memory persistence, reduced attachment formation. The residents he had met embodied those parameters perfectly. The document referenced a live zone deployment located within an urban expansion district, coordinates partially masked but unmistakably aligned with the neighborhood. The system architecture described layered environmental control, lighting calibration, acoustic dampening, surveillance density, behavioral feedback loops through infrastructure design. The neighborhood itself was part of the experiment. The streets, the lighting, the spatial symmetry, the controlled noise levels, the absence of personal landmarks. Every element nudged behavior subtly toward stability, predictability, emotional neutrality. A human ecosystem optimized for calm. Further down, performance metrics were listed. Social volatility remained below target thresholds. Interpersonal conflict frequency decreased steadily after initial deployment. Memory fragmentation stabilized after adaptive recalibration cycles. Anomalous perception events remained within acceptable variance. Anomalous perception events. He thought of the shadowless house, reflections lagging, visual inconsistencies, acceptable variance. The document included a timeline. Phase 1, entity deployment and environmental synchronization. Phase 2, identity integration across municipal systems. Phase 3, behavioral optimization feedback loops. Phase 4, long-term stability observation. Phase 5 was listed but redacted entirely. The analyst scrolled further. Embedded comment logs remained partially intact, internal notes between engineers and oversight committees. One exchange discussed identity coherence drift. Another referenced memory artifact bleed-through. A third raised concern about rendering stability degradation under prolonged uptime. Rendering. The language wasn't metaphorical, it was technical, as if the neighborhood were a persistent simulation running continuously without shutdown. One comment chilled him. If the entities begin forming persistent autobiographical memory chains, containment parameters may fail. Another, shadow mapping irregularities observed in Zone 7 should be monitored. Recommend light field recalibration or local asset refresh. Shadow mapping, exactly the phrase used in graphics engines. The house with no shadows was not a coincidence. It was a known fault, buried inside classified documentation. The final readable section contained a risk assessment summary. Public exposure risk, low. Entity self-awareness risk, moderate. System instability risk, escalating over prolonged runtime. Ethical review status, deferred under national security exemption. Deferred, not approved, not rejected, ignored. At the bottom of the document, a single line remained fully intact. Termination of Zone 07 is not recommended at this stage due to unpredictable cascade effects on integrated systems. Termination, not relocation, not shutdown, termination. He closed the file and sat in silence. The people he had spoken to were not merely missing their pasts. They were designed to not have them. Their emotional flatness was intentional. Their lack of attachment was engineered. Their memory gaps were features. Human behavior stripped down to stable components. Manufactured humanity. His system notification chimed. A remote access attempt had been logged on his machine. Then another. Then a failed authentication alert. Someone was scanning his network. He disconnected immediately and powered down his router. The room fell into quiet darkness, except for the faint glow of his laptop battery indicator. He copied the recovered file onto multiple encrypted drives and physically separated them. Paranoia suddenly felt reasonable. The next morning, the file was gone from his primary drive. Deleted, not moved to trash, not overwritten, not corrupted, cleanly removed. Only his offline copies remained. That meant someone had access, not just to the data, but to him. He began noticing small changes. A car idled outside his building longer than usual. His email spam filter stopped functioning correctly. Login attempts appeared on unrelated accounts. His phone battery drained faster overnight. Nothing provable. Everything suggestive. The document haunted him. If the neighborhood was a simulation embedded inside physical reality, if the residents were synthetic entities with constrained memory and emotion, then the anomalies were not supernatural. They were system errors, glitches in persistence, degradation from continuous operation. The shadowless house was not haunted. It was failing to render correctly, which meant the system was aging, and aging systems eventually collapse. One line echoed relentlessly in his mind. Termination is not recommended due to unpredictable cascade effects. Cascade effects on what? On infrastructure? On connected systems? On the city? On reality itself? If this neighborhood was not isolated, if it was integrated into broader systems, then shutting it down could destabilize far more than a single district. And if it could not be shut down safely, then it would continue running, degrading, adapting, learning, until something inside it crossed a threshold it was never meant to reach. Self-awareness, memory persistence, identity emergence. If synthetic humans began to remember, what would they become? And would anyone be able to stop them once they did? The record should never have existed, but now that it had been seen, it could not be unseen. The question that won't go away. Once a question enters the mind, it rarely leaves quietly. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply settles somewhere behind your thoughts, waiting. The analyst tried to return to normal routines after reading the record. He answered emails. He completed minor contracts. He grocery shopped. He slept. He exercised. He pretended that the world still obeyed familiar rules. But the question followed him everywhere. If a human can exist without a past, if memory can be designed, limited, filtered, if identity can be assembled rather than grown, then what exactly makes someone real? The residents of the neighborhood laughed. They worked, they ate, they dreamed. They experienced discomfort and satisfaction. They navigated social norms. They expressed preference and aversion. They behaved like people. They were people, functionally, socially, legally. Yet something essential had been removed. Not intelligence, not awareness, not consciousness. History. A lifetime normally accumulates weight, regret, nostalgia, embarrassment, attachment, grief. Those layers shape judgment, bias, intuition. They create emotional friction that slows decision-making and introduces unpredictability. The synthetic residents moved without that friction. Clean, efficient, stable. Was that an improvement or a loss so profound that it hollowed the meaning of being human? He realized how much of his own identity lived in memories he rarely revisited consciously. The smell of old classrooms, the sound of a childhood street at dusk, the first deep disappointment, the slow accumulation of private victories and private failures. These fragments stitch continuity into his sense of self. Without them, who would he be? A functional shell, a present-tense organism, a well-behaved system. The question deepened. If these residents began forming authentic memories now, if emotional attachment slowly emerged despite design constraints, would they become fully human over time? Or would they become something else entirely? A hybrid consciousness, an engineered origin evolving into organic identity. What rights would such beings deserve? Could they be terminated ethically if they were designed artifacts, even if they experienced suffering, hope, curiosity? Would deleting them be murder or maintenance? He thought of the shadowless house again, a structure losing its physical relationship with reality, a system artifact revealing underlying fragility. If the environment itself was degrading, then stability was temporary. All controlled systems drift. Entropy is not optional, which meant eventually the neighborhood would change, the residents would change, and someone would have to decide what those changes meant. Another thought emerged, quieter, more disturbing. What if the neighborhood was not the first version? What if similar zones existed elsewhere, hidden inside other cities, quietly refining behavioral models, gradually improving rendering fidelity, memory simulation, emotional complexity? What if humanity was already sharing space with manufactured populations, indistinguishable except for invisible constraints? How many people around him might not have a true past? How would anyone ever know? The systems were designed specifically to integrate seamlessly into civic infrastructure. Birth certificates validated, identification numbers synchronized, tax systems aligned, surveillance normalized. Reality accepted them as real, and reality tends to trust its own databases more than human intuition. If identity can be manufactured convincingly enough, then the concept of authenticity itself begins to blur. The analyst wondered whether his own memories were truly reliable. Memory is not a recording, it is reconstruction. Every recall alters the original slightly. Details shift, emotions recontextualize, false associations form naturally over time. The brain edits reality constantly. If artificial memory drifted, how different was that from biological memory drift? If a synthetic resident sincerely believed they had lived experiences, even if implanted or partially fabricated, were those experiences less real to them emotionally? Pain still hurts, even if its origin is artificial. Joy still feels warm, even if it was engineered. Fear still triggers the body, even if the threat was simulated. Subjective reality does not care about manufacturing origin. Meaning emerges inside experience, not documentation. That realization unsettled him deeply. Perhaps the residents were not incomplete humans. Perhaps they were simply a different path to personhood. A manufactured childhood replaced by direct adulthood. A compressed origin. A shortcut through development. Evolution by design instead of biology. And if that was true, then the experiment was not about stability. It was about control. Control over emotion, control over memory, control over social behavior, control over predictability. A population that would not protest, would not radicalize, would not destabilize systems, would not challenge authority unpredictably. A population engineered to remain calm, compliant, reliable. The implications extended far beyond one neighborhood. If scalable, such systems could reshape cities, workforces, governance, even definitions of citizenship. A chilling question surfaced. If synthetic populations proved more stable than organic ones, which population would institutions eventually favor? Efficiency rarely bows to ethics voluntarily. He imagined a future where natural humans slowly became the volatile minority, unpredictable, emotional, inefficient, while manufactured citizens filled stable roles across infrastructure and governance. Who would control the parameters then? Who would decide what emotional ranges were acceptable? What memories were safe to retain? What attachments were too destabilizing? And who would monitor the monitors? The analyst understood why the document warned about unpredictable cascade effects. Once systems capable of generating human identity exist, they inevitably influence the very society they were meant to observe. Observer becomes participant, tool becomes actor, experiment becomes ecosystem. There was no clean exit. Even if Zone 7 were terminated, the knowledge could not be erased. The methods existed. The temptation existed. And temptation scales faster than caution. The final version of the question haunted him most. If one day you discover that someone you love has no true past, no childhood photos, no authentic origin, but feels love, fear, loyalty, and hope as vividly as you do, would you treat them differently? Would they deserve less dignity, less protection, less moral weight? Or would your empathy override the technical definition of their existence? At what point does origin stop mattering? At what point does experience become enough? The neighborhood still existed. People still walked their dogs. Children still played calmly. Lights still turned on automatically at sunset. Shadows still behaved incorrectly near one quiet house. The system continued running, quietly, persistently, learning, and the question remained, not loud, not urgent, just patient, waiting for the day when it would no longer be theoretical, waiting for the moment when someone, somewhere, would have to answer it in the real world. When history is optional. History has always been humanity's anchor. We tell ourselves who we are by remembering where we came from. We carry invisible timelines inside our minds, childhood streets, old classrooms, first friendships, small embarrassments, quiet triumphs. These fragments form continuity, stitching yesterday into today, turning experience into identity. Without memory, the present floats untethered. The neighborhood challenged that assumption. Here, history was not a requirement. It was optional. The residents functioned without it, calmly, efficiently, peacefully. They woke up, followed routines, performed responsibilities, interacted politely, and returned home at night with no emotional residue trailing behind them. No nostalgia, no regret, no inherited pain, no unfinished stories. Only now, only stability. At first glance, it looked like progress, a world free from trauma, a society without inherited conflict, a population unburdened by collective mistakes. The past, after all, carries heavy weight. It fuels resentment, identity division, generational fear. History remembers wars long after the last soldier has died. It preserves grievances longer than any living witness. If memory could be softened, filtered, redesigned, perhaps humanity could finally escape its own cycles. But something subtle was missing in the neighborhood. Not emotion, not intelligence, depth. Conversations ended cleanly, without lingering curiosity. Relationships remained polite but shallow. Ambition rarely escalated into obsession. Love did not grow roots. Loss left no scars. Without a past, nothing truly accumulated. Every day reset quietly, like a system clearing its cache overnight. Meaning normally grows from friction, the slow accumulation of contradictions, mistakes, and imperfect memories. It is shaped by context, by struggle, by narrative continuity. Without that, experience becomes flat, efficient, and strangely weightless, pleasant, but thin. The residents were peaceful, but were they fulfilled? Fulfillment requires longing. Longing requires memory. Memory requires time. When history becomes optional, time itself begins to lose emotional gravity. The analyst wondered if the neighborhood represented a future humanity might willingly choose. A world where trauma could be edited out, where grief could be limited, where attachment could be optimized, where unpredictability could be minimized. A world where emotional pain becomes a technical problem to solve. But pain also teaches boundaries. Loss teaches value, mistakes teach growth, conflict teaches resilience. Erase too much friction and development stagnates. Stability becomes inertia. Safety becomes confinement. Freedom quietly dissolves. The shadowless house lingered in his thoughts, a physical symbol of what happens when systems simplify reality too aggressively. When nuance is removed, when complexity is trimmed for efficiency, the world begins losing dimensionality. Shadows exist because objects interfere with light. They prove interaction. They prove resistance. They prove presence. A world without shadows is a world where nothing pushes back. A world without history risks becoming a world without depth. Yet the temptation remains strong. Human beings carry enormous psychological weight from inherited narratives, national trauma, family dysfunction, cultural expectation, personal regret. If those burdens could be lifted artificially, many would accept the trade without hesitation. Who wouldn't want a clean emotional slate? Who wouldn't want to wake up without ghosts? The danger lies not in the technology itself, but in who controls the eraser. Who decides which memories are harmful? Which attachments are destabilizing? Which emotions exceed acceptable thresholds? Which histories are inconvenient? Once memory becomes optional, power quietly migrates to those who curate it. Identity becomes editable. Reality becomes negotiable. Truth becomes flexible. The analyst realized the neighborhood was not merely an experiment in synthetic humanity. It was a prototype for memory governance, a demonstration that identity can be engineered not by controlling bodies, but by shaping narratives. History is more than a record of events. It is a defense against manipulation. It preserves inconvenient truths. It exposes repeating mistakes. It resists simplification. Remove it, and control becomes frictionless. The residents were not oppressed in obvious ways. They were comfortable, safe, content, but they were also easy to predict, easy to guide, easy to optimize. A population without deep memory rarely challenges its environment. It adapts instead, quietly, efficiently, until adaptation becomes dependency. The question is not whether a world without history could function. Clearly it can. The real question is what kind of humanity would emerge when memory becomes a setting instead of a legacy? Would creativity survive without longing? Would courage exist without fear remembered? Would empathy deepen without shared pain? Would wisdom exist without accumulated mistakes? Or would humanity become a beautifully stable system, perfectly managed, endlessly calm, and quietly empty? The neighborhood remained silent in its perfection. Lights turned on automatically at sunset, streets stayed clean, people smiled politely, shadows behaved incorrectly near one quiet house. History was optional there, but meaning still searched for a place to grow. And meaning has a way of resisting erasure. Even in the most controlled systems, something always leaks through. A dream, a question, a shadow that refuses to disappear. Because no matter how carefully memory is engineered, the human mind was never designed to live without a past.
Shadows crawl where the light won't go. A silent wind, it starts.